Beta Upsilon Chi, Bucks, presents Man to Men, the premier audio journal for men who live faithfully and lead courageously. I'm Jared Musgrove, and today we welcome Matt Mikalatos. He is the author of Praying with St. Nicholas. Now, we're talking to him today about the history of a man and a servant of Jesus who came to the ministry in a really interesting way. This is a man who was hungry for miracles, who paid attention to the children and the people around him. And guys, I think you're going to be inspired by the true story of the real Saint Nick. Matt Mikalatos, welcome to Man to Men.
Thanks so much. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, I've enjoyed getting a little more familiar with your work. Certainly the St. Nicholas book that we're going to talk about today, but really you've been a prolific writer for a long time. I think I saw a book on St. Patrick in there. I saw some novels. Did I see some graphic novels as well?
Yeah, my first graphic novel, God With Us, just came out this last year, actually. And it's really great. I love it. I think you'll like it too.
Oh, fantastic. Yes. Well, I had a lot of fun, and I saw a couple of things that I'm going to dive into. So, but for today, I wanted to dial in on what drew you personally to the story of St. Nicholas. And man, what makes his a gospel story worth reclaiming?
So I had done this book on St. Patrick, and I was talking to my publisher about other books we might do. We enjoyed that book so much, about kind of heroes of the faith, someone that we could learn alongside of in our journey toward Christ. And I said, I love Christmas. What if we did St. Nicholas? Realizing I didn't know much about St. Nicholas. I knew maybe a story or two. And we said, oh, that's a good idea. And then I started doing the research. And I was like, how has the church lost so many of these stories where I grew up in church and did not hear these? So, and I was actually telling Jared this before the show. The book is out, it's done. And I'm still like reading up and learning more because this man is so fascinating. The things that he did during the time he lived in, just incredible example for us as people who are trying to be people of faith. To follow this man's journey is so incredible.
Yeah. I mean, and I shared with you as we were pre-gaming that the book is set up to, in a sense, kind of be a Christmas devotional, walk you up to Christmas. You read a few pages a day. I kept going because the story, as you said, of St. Nicholas is so compelling.
Yeah.
I kind of didn't want to put it down.
Yeah.
It was fascinating finding out about the real man and minister that really, a couple of times you would just get a little bit of his background, or you'd see the meme going around, he punches heretics or whatever. But outside of that, I knew nothing about the man. So I'm so grateful for what you've brought to the fore. When you began researching, Matt, what about Nicholas's life surprised you or challenged you the most?
It's interesting. I had the vague idea that St. Nicholas probably was from medieval Europe, because a lot of our stories about St. Nicholas or ideas of St. Nicholas, even the outfit he wears, for those who are watching the video.
Yes. For our YouTube viewers, Matt is arrayed in some European Christmas garb.
Yes.
Like you probably think St. Nick wore, but we find out.
Yeah, we find out that's not true at all. He's born in 270 AD, right? Still in the Roman Empire, and within 200 years of Christ about. And the church is so young. The church buildings are just becoming a thing as he's coming into the world.
Right.
The Roman Empire is still persecuting believers, and it gets much worse in his 20s and 30s. And then by the end of his life, Constantine has come to power, and it's a Christian empire. So he lives through this really packed time of radical transformation of the society he lives in. And think about this. Okay, imagine the world we live in, and then listen to this description. He was living in a time where there were empires collapsing. There were wars happening throughout the known world. There were pirates taking over things, so people pushing in. Right. There were very, very wealthy people and incredibly poor people. And there was horrific disease traveling through the uncontrollable disease like they'd never seen before. There were famines, like so many things that sounds like the world we're living in right now. And what I love about Nicholas is that we see him in the midst of really difficult circumstances, whether it's persecution or whether it's being given immense power. And in the midst of both of those, he's really successful in following Christ well, regardless of what position he finds himself in. And that's something I find very inspiring and interesting.
Well, and his entrance into ministry is a fascinating story. Could you share that with the guys? Because I don't know that pastoral ministry was on his bingo card. Can you share a little bit about how he stepped into that?
Yeah, so Nicholas is born on the coast of what we would now call Turkey in 270. He's to a wealthy family. They're Greek, but they're Roman citizens. And he is well off. His family are probably merchants of some sort. We don't know exactly what. But his parents are both from wealthy families. So he has it naturally on multiple generations, likely on both sides. And what ends up happening is his parents both die probably when he's in his teens. His uncle is actually an early minister. So he's a Christian minister. His name also is Nicholas. But what happens is certainly before he's 30, probably in his late teens, both his parents die and everything is left to him. And Nicholas, seeing the world kind of collapsing around him, which it is, there are wealthy people who are now poor. There are poor people who are dying. There is constant need, orphans, widows, people being sold into slavery, all these things, that Nicholas decides that what he wants to do with his money is what scripture says. And what I think we a lot of times try to dismiss somehow is that he gives it all away, all of it. He impoverishes himself with generosity and joins a full-time ministry, essentially. And then, by the time he's 30, he's a pretty significant leader in the church, what they would have called a bishop in those days. And this is pre-denominations, right? There's no Catholic church. There's no Orthodox church. There's no Coptic church. There certainly aren't any Protestants. It's just, if you're a Christian, we all kind of belong together because everyone's
right. I mean, you're
trying to kill us.
You're hitting Nicholas's life right as we're just kind of stepping out of really just house churches.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And again, church buildings are an innovation. This is just starting to happen as Nicholas is probably as he's entering into his 20s. We're starting to see a lot of people, probably they met in Nicholas's home, right? Because his family's wealthy. So all of the neighborhood Christians would come to his house and maybe they had a room set aside, maybe they like an upper room kind of place. It could be. But an actual building set aside for church was a new thing. And usually from the generosity of people like Nicholas's family.
Yeah. Well, walk us through a little bit of those early years of Nicholas's life. And he does eventually arrive in Bethlehem. Can you tell that story?
Yeah. So I'll tell you, do you want the most famous Nicholas story probably, and one that we get a lot of tradition from, is when Nicholas, this may have been before he became a minister. We're not sure because he has money in this story. And the way the story goes is there was a wealthy Roman man who had lost everything. He had no money anymore, but he had 3 daughters. And the way marriage worked at the time was to marry off your daughter, you paid a dowry. So it was essentially a financial package that went with your child to say, you won't have to take care of this person. It's beneficial for you to take them. And then they enter your wealthy family, right? And it's beneficial for everyone. But he did not have money for dowries. In fact, he didn't even really have money for food. And so he'd gotten to the place that he was thinking, the best thing I can do for my daughters, just imagine this as a father, how horrible this would be. The decision was, maybe if I give my girls into slavery, they'll have a better life than if I don't. Like if they get a good master, maybe they can be well fed and cared for at least. So that's what he's debating. Nicholas somehow hears about this. And one night he sneaks to the man's house and he throws a bag of gold in through the window, which in later stories, so this is the early version, in medieval Europe, the story starts being that he drops it in a chimney, that he puts it in some socks hanging by the fire, that he puts it in some shoes, things like that, right? But in the original story, he throws it in through a window. The man's amazed. It's enough money to put his first daughter into a healthy marriage somewhere. The second night, it happens again. And the man's amazed. So the third night, he stays up late waiting. And when he sees the money come through the window, he runs out and grabs this kid, probably who's running away, Nicholas. And he says, I wanted this is amazing. Thank you. Why are you doing this? And Nicholas is embarrassed that he's been caught and says, please, please don't tell anyone. This is not from me. This is a gift to you from God, which, of course, we know this guy didn't listen to him because we are telling the story now. But it's this, just kind of amazing moment, right, where he's ministering in this way. And we see this attitude in his life throughout. Now, the Bethlehem thing is interesting because what happens is there's a period of persecution that comes as Nicholas moves into ministry. He becomes this bishop in a nearby town called Myra. His church, during the persecution under a guy named Diocletian, probably is destroyed. All of the Christian scriptures are burnt, and Nicholas spends 5 years in prison. When he gets out, he actually goes back to being a bishop again for a number of years till Diocletian dies, which it's a more involved story. But the point is Diocletian dies, and Nicholas goes to Egypt and then to what we would call Israel or Gaza, depending on which part of where he was traveling. Probably he went to Egypt because that was a central place for people to copy the scriptures, and that's how you got a new version of the Bible for your if you lost yours in the Diocletian persecutions. And then, so likely what happened is he went to Egypt and said, we need a bunch of scriptures. And they said, we'll see you in 2 to 3 years. And he said, okay, right. I'm going to go walk where Jesus walked. At this time, we didn't call it the Holy Land. That was a product of Constantine, actually. It's religious tourism. So he went there. There weren't churches built on any of the sites where Jesus was born or lived or died, or resurrected for that matter. There were religious communities, though. So he got to walk around and see the places where Jesus was, all through the eyes of the community of faith that had been living there the last several hundred years, just saying like, hey, according to my great-great-grandfather, this is where this happened. And they would take him and show him, which is kind of cool. We still have that in some sense today. You can still have that experience, but now it's all been commodified and made more religious than it would have been in Nicholas's experience. So he lived in a cave with a bunch of monks for 3 years and just walked where Jesus walked, mostly around the Bethlehem area.
Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting. One thing I learned about him, and this is a kind of a rip-roaring dive into church history, a fascinating period in the history of the church where you learn about Nicholas's context. And it as you mentioned already, the church, Christians in general, are persecuted. Most of the world is still very, very pagan. Roman Empire, still ruling everything. How did that context begin to shape Nicholas's understanding and teaching of the gospel, particularly through the things that mark him in generosity, sacrificial love, those kinds of things?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I think this is very hard, especially as Americans, to imagine. Like we think we understand this, but I don't know that we do. Christianity was a minority faith of such an extreme degree that people saw it the same way we might think of a small religious cult. It was considered an offshoot of Judaism. It was this weird little thing that when you met someone who was a Christian, you might have been a little embarrassed. You're like, oh, you're one of those guys who worships the dead criminal who was executed by the state. That's weird. But what we do know is that the Christian population, were well known as people who cared for those in community around them, not just other Christians, but for people in the community. Nicholas's mother had a reputation of caring for the poor, and Nicholas, of course, had that reputation going forward as well. So I think it's really interesting. There wasn't this question of that I think we can sometimes wrestle with. What is my obligation to people outside the church? Because most people were outside the church. The question was, how do I, as a follower of Jesus, best represent God to the people around me, regardless of their faith? And that's what kept drawing people into the community of faith. So I think there's a clarity to that, right? That I think can be difficult for us to keep sight of in the modern day.
Certainly, especially when one of our best evangelism strategies is get your friend to Christmas or Easter service. That was not an option.
Right? No, that's not the way it was now. And right, it wasn't a weekly service at a church building. Right, it was do you want to come to my house where some of my friends are going to come and we're going to talk about our lives and sing songs and read Holy Scriptures and do these things? But it was a consistent thing we did throughout the week, multiple times in the week, right? Right. So you were really inviting people into your community, not just to attend a service. Yeah. And it was a weird community, right? Wealthy and poor people and people of multiple nationalities. And you had Roman imperial people who could be in there with barbarians. And it was a mess. It was a very strange collection of people.
Absolutely. No, it's fascinating, and you go into a lot of detail there in the book. I always tell our authors, I don't want to give away the store, but there's just so many great stories and insights into our own faith, and the history of our faith family in the book. I did want to go here too, Matt, is that over the centuries, Nicholas's story has morphed dramatically into the figure of Santa Claus.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier, that meme, he punched some heretics. Would love to hear that story.
Yeah.
And then maybe walk us into how did we get from the man you're describing to punching heretics to gifts, elves, the North Pole, chimneys, reindeer. Like, take us on that. How did we get there?
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with Nicaea, because I think that's an interesting story. And then we'll follow through to how we got to today.
Nicaea, my favorite Christmas story.
So Council of Nicaea is what we call the first ecumenical gathering of the church. Ecumenical just means the whole church, right? And what happened was, and this is weird, this is when Christianity is first getting really drawn into politics in a weird way. Constantine becomes emperor and he becomes Christian, or depending on how you read the history, at least sees that Christianity would be helpful to him, one or the other. And what happens is he looks around the empire and says, I just declared this my religion, and you guys are fighting with each other about stuff, and it's embarrassing to me. So I'm going to hold a meeting, and if you guys can't figure this out yourselves, you're going to come out to my place, Nicaea, which was right outside of Constantinople, and we're going to figure this out together. And I'm going to sit there and babysit you if we have to. So he paid for it. And everyone from the Eastern Church basically came, which Nicholas would have been one of those people. There was a big theological fight going on at the time about whether Jesus was God or how he was God. The other position was like, yeah, he's divine, but God created him. So he's eternal, but eternal into the future, not eternal into the past. So he's not God, but he is God, like that. And this is why Nicholas had gone to jail during the persecution, right? Was that he refused to deny Christ and say, he's just one among many gods. He wouldn't say that. So now we have other Christians that are saying the same thing and saying, not just saying it, but saying this is good theology. And so it's not surprising that Nicholas might have gotten a little emotional. I'm sure a bunch of people in the room were emotional. And the way the story goes is at some point during this big debate, which lasted for months, by the way, at some point during this big debate, he got so incensed about something that one of the men was saying that he got up and slapped him, which actually was illegal because you can't do an act of violence in the presence of the emperor. And Constantine was there that day. So Nicholas ends up in jail again, which is terrible. And was at least briefly defrocked. He was no longer a minister, no longer a bishop. And there are a bunch of stories about how that got reversed. But the main point is Constantine was like, I can't punish this guy at this thing I called. I'm not going to go murdering people and give him the death penalty, which he could have easily gotten. So he says to the church, you guys figure out how you want to punish him. And basically they were like, that was really embarrassing, Nicholas. And they put him back in. And there's a bunch of stories. Maybe there were visions, maybe there were dreams. But what we know for sure is that he ends up back at being a bishop again. And we don't see that sort of act of violence from him ever again in the future.
Man's Men is made possible in part by our partners at Southern Seminary. Guys, when your ministry calling is serious, the people who prepare you matter. At Southern Seminary, you'll study under pastors, scholars, and faithful leaders who've guided generations of gospel ministers. They are known for teaching God's word with clarity and for living it out with integrity. If you're ready to be trained by a trusted faculty for a lifetime of faithfulness, start your MDiv at Southern Seminary. Visit sbts.edu/MDIV. Yeah, it's really an incredible life. So how do we lose some of that history and end up with, the fat, jolly old man?
So this is really interesting. So he spends his whole life, he dies when he's 72 years old. He spends his whole life as a bishop in Myra, in modern day Turkey. He dies and is buried there at the church there. What happens is, during the medieval ages, religious tourism has really become a thing. It's a way that a church can make a lot of money. Or people can make a lot of money. And some traders come through to Myra and they start asking like, hey, I heard you guys have a saint that was buried here. Like, who's that? Where is he? And one of the ministers happens to mention, oh, he's in the crypt over there. And these guys steal his bones and take them to Italy, which they're still there. They're in Bari, Italy. You can go visit them today. We know for sure it's his actual bones. They've been studied. Yeah, and they build a church around it. They build a whole story around it. And they take some of the actual stories about Nicholas, who was not particularly well known outside of a few communities of faith locally, and actually the church in the Bethlehem area, they still were talking about Nicholas. But they start to build some stories. They take some true stories that we know are true, that we have earlier documentation of. And then they start creating some more medieval stories as well. So we have stories about Nicholas. If you've ever wondered where the Christmas pickle came from, that's a medieval story that is just invented. It definitely did not happen historically. And so what ends up happening from there, a lot of
I won't tell my kids as I hide the Christmas pickle every year. I won't tell them that's not a thing. Yeah. Fun family tradition, but no basis in history.
No, but I think what's interesting is even that story, which we won't go into, but even that story is really about someone who sees children in need, wants to care for them, wants to see justice done in the world, wants poor people cared for, things like this, right? So the core ideas of Nicholas are still in the story, even though the story is clearly fictionalized medieval story. And so a lot of our pictures of Nicholas, the red coat, the fur, right? You're not wearing fur in Turkey. That's not a thing. But it is in Europe, especially as it spreads into Northern Europe. And then some of our American conceptions of Nicholas actually come about in the last 100 years because of advertising. So we start to see Coca-Cola and places like that, people trying to sell toys, the Macy's parade, right? These are all taking St. Nicholas and saying, this is a guy who brings toys. This is a guy, which that's not false, right? That there's a connection to the true stories there. So St. Nicholas and Santa Claus, right? Nikolaus, it's the same guy, Saint Claus, Nicholas. It's all based in the same guy. But Santa Claus as a figure is this kind of legendary, fictionalized version of Nicholas the Man, which is, I think honestly kind of cool. And even when you look at, so one of our family favorite movies is Elf, right? Where kind-hearted Santa takes in an orphan boy and raises him among the elves, which is ridiculous, obviously not based in reality, but there is this thing where he has this heart for the orphans and he wants them to be happy and to have good feelings and to be kind to people. And it's amazing that, almost 2,000 years later, that this one man's life, that this core piece of it has become something that is so celebrated throughout a good portion of the world. Really fascinating, actually.
Oh, it really is. What do you think, as much as you've studied him and as I'm picking up on our conversation, are still studying St. Nicholas, what do you think he would think about all this?
Oh, boy. Wow. That's a good question. I suspect at the end of the day, he would be very pleased for any story that purported to have anything to do with him, that turned people's hearts toward the vulnerable, toward children, toward widows, toward women in need. These were things that were consistent parts of his ministry. I'm sure he would be baffled by a lot of it. It would be culturally absolutely bizarre to him in a variety of ways. And I'm sure there are things that he would find upsetting that he would want to correct. But
I didn't dress like that.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. No, he didn't dress like that. And I do think, obviously, right, we have these competing narratives sometimes in Christmas stories about buy things for others versus the commodification of Christmas. Like, he's someone who gave away all of his wealth to take care of people's actual sustenance needs. Like, am I going to have food next week? So the idea of we need to buy 30 gifts for everyone would be pretty foreign to him in one sense, right? Like, he lived in a culture that had those kinds of celebrations. He grew up with them, but he would see those as pagan. So yeah, I think there'd be some conflicting feelings maybe, but I have to imagine the fact that he's still pretty closely associated with Christ in a variety of ways, in the sense of that's obviously of importance to both St. Nicholas and Santa Claus, I think would be valuable to him. And the peace on earth, goodwill toward men, that whole idea of things is something that was close to his heart. So I think he would like, you hear these stories about, the Christmas truce in World War I, where everyone stopped fighting because it was Christmas and got out in no man's land and threw snowballs and sang hymns together. If he could be in any way associated with that, he'd be thrilled, right? But he's not necessarily wanting to sell Coca-Cola either.
Right. One thing I really enjoyed about the book and I found happening in my own heart and mind as I was, again, just reading through it, almost like a little novella. So learning so many things. You frame Christmas in the book as a lot more than just nostalgia or tradition or, product placement. If you could give some practical St. Nicholas style action for Christian men as we step into the holidays every year, what would those be that would be in the spirit of this spiritual leader?
I think by the time I was done writing the book, what my biggest regret was that I knew this would always be a Christmas book. And I think that the story of St. Nicholas and the example he is to me personally, I was like, I wish this could be a book people would pick up any time of the year to read and to learn from this man and the way that he served Christ so generously and so consistently in a way that I find challenging and inspiring. What I do love about Christmas and what I think we can see in the story of Nicholas is this idea, right? The whole idea of Christmas is that the kingdom of God has broken into our world. And that for this time, at least, there is peace. Everyone is working so hard to make sure relationships are good, right? Like you're like, we're going to set things aside so we can make it through these 2 days with grandma and grandpa and my brother and my, like whoever. You're like, we're going to set those things aside. We're going to love each other. We're going to be kind. We're going to see each other's needs. We're going to make sure so-and-so has dairy-free eggnog. We're thinking about each other. We're trying to take care of each other. We're more likely to stop and help a stranger. All these things. It's these places where the kingdom of God is breaking through. And I think what Nicholas challenges us to is like, why is this something that happens over the course of 12 days in the holiday season? Is this not what we are called to as people of God? Should this not be our everyday? And, like Scrooge says at the end of his little story, right? He's going to live the Christmas spirit all day, all year through. And I think that's what Nicholas pushes me toward, is that we have all these things about him that have survived and been compartmentalized into Christmas. And what if we could learn to live the way that we think of as Christmas living into the year more broadly? I think that would be beautiful. What we're called to.
That's very, very good. Yeah, just helping us remember the deeper story, the incarnation, God breaking through.
Right.
That's fantastic. What would you say, Matt, to the guy who's listening, or maybe, guys like me who read the book and they're going like, man, that's nice. It's making me rethink a lot of things and traditions I grew up with. How would you encourage, what do I need to do? Do I need to throw out the Christmas tree? Do I need to, stand up in front of everyone and say, hey guys, listen, the socks on the mantle, totally false, never happened. How would you coach that? How do you think Nicholas would want us to walk through those aspects of Christmas?
That's a great question. I am a big believer in not shaming other people's ways of celebrating Jesus. If it can be different than my way, that's okay. Maybe it's better for them, better for their family. If you want to dress as Santa and ride a reindeer around your neighborhood and throw gifts to kids, more power to you. Yeah. And there are a lot of things that come from pagan tradition that we have Christianized, including the date December 25th. That used to be the date for a pagan Roman god. And that the first official Christmas celebrated by the Christian church happened, I think, 6 years before Nicholas died. That was part of the church decided, yeah, we're not going to celebrate the day of the eternal son anymore. Now we're going to celebrate the birth of Jesus. We stole it from them. And
fascinating that he lived to see that.
Isn't that incredible? Yeah.
It really is. Yeah.
Yeah. So he just lived through such an intensely packed time of life. So all of which to say, did Nicholas celebrate the holy kind of season of Christmas? We know that he did. He was a bishop in the church. Absolutely, he did. Were there some things that were pagan that they adapted into church celebration? Yeah. Gift giving is absolutely from a Roman pagan tradition. Does that mean we shouldn't do it? No, absolutely not. We take what's good from it. We make it holy. That's what Jesus is going to do. All things, scripture says that there's a time coming where even the pots and pans will say holy to the Lord on them, right? There's no such thing as something that is pagan or something that is irreligious. All things will be holy unto Jesus in time. So why shouldn't we take those things and make them holy? I think it's beautiful. I think it's good.
If I can get a little more personal, Matt.
Yeah.
Has your Christmas changed at all since writing the book? What feels different in your mind, your heart, maybe even in your home?
That's a great question too. I don't know that. So my older kids have left the home now. So our youngest is still with us. So some traditions have changed. You know how it is. You never know the last time you're going to do certain traditions. Because you just didn't know that was the last time you're going to do it. So there's some things that have been set aside as our children have aged. I think what is shifting for us is the participation of our kids in the creation of what Christmas is, which is actually kind of beautiful as they're getting older, kind of what their preferences are, what they want. I think for Nicholas specifically, for me, there's been a change internally where I'm just trying to pay more attention to the needs of people around me, including my family. Because that's at the core of it, that's who Nicholas was, is that when everyone else saw the world collapsing and maybe even had despair about it, Nicholas wasn't like that. He saw the world collapsing and said, okay, here's this family right here with 3 daughters. How do I help them? Here's this old man and this old woman living in a cave. How do I help them? Here's someone about to be unjustly harmed by the government that gives me money for my church. How do I help these people? He was so focused on others. I think in the way scripture talks about, right? That if we love God and love others, that's how the law is fulfilled, right? And I think it was a really clear core thing for Nicholas. He felt that if he could take care of the people around him, he was doing what he was called to do. So I'm trying to shift more that way, not to worry as much about the big things, not to feel despair about the places that I think the world is broken, which it is, but instead to take action in the places that are near me where I have responsibility or proximity.
Oh, that's really good. And actually leads me into my last question for you today, man, is the book is Praying with St. Nicholas. Mm-hmm. There's several beautiful prayers in there. Is there one or just, even an approach to prayer that you hope that men return to this season?
Yeah, there's a prayer toward the end after Nicholas has moved into what we call the Christian empire, right? So now he's a person of influence and power, which has its unique temptations that he does really well with. And so there's a chapter in the book called A Prayer for Lives of Godliness and Holiness, because the temptation when you have power is to rely on your power instead of relying on God, and to allow godliness and holiness to go away. You don't need them, right? Because you have this power. And the prayer that is listed for that, one of the things it says in that little chapter, it says over and over, Nicholas helped turn the hearts of the people around him to the suffering, to the vulnerable, to the hurting, children, orphans, widows, refugees, the poor. These were people who were all around him during the years that he lived. And this is the prayer that is in this chapter. And I'll just share it in the sense that I think we are called to be people who are protecting and caring for those who are around us. And it is easy to become distracted from that. And so this little prayer is just short. It says, Lord God, I know that each of us is called to places of influence. There are people who look up to me, who see me as an example in their spiritual lives. And that's true, whether you believe that or not. That is true. There are people who look to you and see you as an example of what it means to follow Jesus. So please shape me to be a person of peace, living a quiet life. Teach me how to be godly. Help me to grow in holiness.
Oh, may it be. That's really good. Before we sign off today, Matt, you've got thousands of brothers and praying men listening to this. How can we be praying for you and your ministry?
Oh, wow. Thank you. So I was a full-time minister until 4 years ago. 4 years ago, I transitioned to be a full-time writer largely through moving into writing in Hollywood. So I write a lot of movies and television now, which it's a very interesting culture and a really challenging job to have in a variety of ways.
And what a time to be involved in that.
I mean, it's amazing. The industry itself is going through massive transformation and maybe collapse. And there are people within that industry who are amazing people of faith. And there are people within that industry who legitimately don't know anyone who's a Christian. I've met several people that are like, oh, you're kind of the first actual Christian I've known. I kind of see them on TV or whatever, which is fascinating in the United States. Yeah. Right. These are people that are just, their culture is so cut off from Christian culture and influence that they don't even recognize. I don't know that they actually don't know any Christians, but they're not close.
It's like they spotted, it's like they spotted a zebra. It's like, I've never seen one in real life.
So like just the fact of saying like, oh, I'm a devout Christian who used to be a minister. For some people, they're like, whoa, that's weird. Like, I want to ask you questions about like, what is that? What is that like? What does that mean? So I think a couple things. One is it's really easy, and I'm sure we all deal with this. It is easy to get distracted from the spiritual reality that we're called to interact in because of temporary needs or temporal needs. And since it's a freelance job, there can be moments of real panic. Like, are we going to make money enough for this month? Right. Or how long can we make this check last? And in those moments, it can be easy to be distracted from the people who God has put into relationship with me. And also it can be easy to become pragmatic and think what would sell versus what am I called to bring into the world? So I think prayer for reminders to be connected to Jesus, right? And to be caring for the people around me and trusting that things like our temporal needs that, Jesus has said so clearly, it's not like God doesn't know about those things, and that it's okay to trust that he will bring us the right things in time. So, but it's so easy to know that and believe it and not to feel it every day though,
Man. Well, bro, like I said, you got thousands of brothers who were praying with you as you were sharing that. And it just occurs to me, your bio may say former missionary or former minister. There's no former about it. Like, you're frontline. You are frontline, bro. Grateful for you and your work and just your creativity. You're an excellent teacher, Matt.
Oh, thank you for saying that. It means a lot.
Yeah, you really are. In fact, I'd love to have you back, and maybe you can wear your St. Patrick garb as we get a little closer to the celebration of that saint.
I would love that. I would love to talk about
that's a great story too. Yeah, we'll have to do a follow-up. But for today, man, thank you for coming on to Man, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Man to Men is powered by Beta Upsilon Chi, commonly referred to as Bucks. What if I told you that one of the most spiritually transformational places on a college campus might not be a church program or a campus ministry, but a fraternity? That's Bucks. Everywhere, every day, Bucks men and alumni are raising families, leading in organizations, and strengthening churches to impact our communities for Christ. You can find out more about Beta Upsilon Chi by transliterating our Greek letters and adding a .org. That's byx.org. We are produced, rather well I might add, by the good gentlemen of the Good Podcast Company. For Beta Upsilon Chi, I'm Dr. Jared Musgrove with Man to Men.